If I went to 15-year-old Pastor Paul and I just said to him, when you're 24 years old, you're going to be a pastor, what would that young man say to me?
When God is calling a man to leadership, he calls the man. And so there are things that will come with that man. I had no idea what it meant to care for people. What are life's problems? What are worries?
How can we as followers help our leaders?
I think we felt God's call to be New Mahal. We felt the need for his presence to dwell. But we realized that whenever we would do more, we were getting less results. This is one of the secrets. I pray that every single leader understands. It is not about what you do. It's about a gathering that people are truly transformed is when it's 100% God. Not 60% God with our efforts.
Now that you are where you are now, and you could look back in retrospect and be like, I made a lot of mistakes. What could you say to those young people who didn't get the privilege of just like benefiting from the Pastor Paul as you are now? So, Pastor Paul, you're a pastor, a young pastor, but you're not just a pastor in the church, but you're also a pastor to a missionary movement happening right now, quite fresh off as well. I think one thing that goes through my mind is like, let's say I could go back in time and I could just ask maybe 15 years old, 15-year-old Pastor Paul. If I went to 15-year-old Pastor Paul and I just said to him, when you're 24 years old, you're going to be a pastor. You're going to be pastoring a group of young people, traveling from wherever God sends you. What would that young man say to me?
Great question. Well, like 15 years old is, I'm thinking about the moment where around that time, my family and we were living in London. And we had lost our house because we weren't able to keep up with the rent. And so we had to move on an emergency from London to Essex and stay with some of our family there at the time. And I was just like stepping into being curious about God, being curious about this faith. And it was that year really that I felt more opened up to the concept of God. And long story short, I guess God found his way to not just allow me to fall in love with the house of God and the like meeting together as believers, but also allow me to fall in love with him, his person. I've told this like story a few times, but in my room reading a Bible plan, and it says Christianity isn't a religion, it's a person. And that moment I have an encounter with Jesus where he fills my room, and I realize that there is a difference between the gatherings, the communities, and the person of Jesus. And so at that time, he probably would have accepted where I am now, but would have felt very unequipped and not ready at all for what this life would come with. When God saved me, I was very, very passionate. I was zealous. I was like, I can preach to anything moving, still. I could preach to a wall. And I think God was just introducing me to like that concept of being a teacher and someone who will mature people. But for what I know of ministry now, very unequipped and not ready for the totality and like the fullness of what a ministry life and living for God comes with. So that's probably what I'd say he would have been at.
I'm a bit curious about that young boy where you basically said your family was in that situation where you're kind of struggling, you're trying to make ends meet type thing, but then you're also encountering God. Where was your mind in this space of, okay, so this is who God says he is, but this is the reality of my life right now? How did you navigate believing in what God says, who he says he is, what he can do, whilst also looking at the reality of your life, and you're like, oh, I need you to, I don't know, did you feel like I need you to be in this space? Where was your mind in that situation?
My mind, the best way I can describe it is when Saul had his encounter in the scriptures and he met Jesus on the road to Damascus and his eyes were blinded, so he couldn't see. And he recognizes that this is the Son of Man. He has an encounter and then he can't see, he's blind for 3 days. And in a similar sense, I felt like the moment I encountered God, he filled my life to a point where I actually didn't care about anything else. It was almost like everything that was true about God was my only reality. And like I genuinely, I wish I could be making this up.
Yeah.
But the concept of being in that financial situation that we were in, the concept of having to do or work through my A-levels and study in different people's houses because we didn't have the space at home. That almost didn't matter because of what I knew to be true about Christ. And he filled my life, filled it to a point where anything else was just nothing. And I think God definitely had to teach me how to live life, because you can be so aware of the reality of heaven that you are sometimes unaware of what needs to happen on earth, setting up a life for yourself, the expectations of people and family. And I felt like my head was just aware, the presence of God, the reality of Jesus. And so I almost had to learn life through that. And God had to help me understand that though you are not of this world, you're still in it. And you still have to learn to live life in it. And I felt like I was tugging on both later on, but in that season of my life, it was just Jesus, the reality of his presence. And that was enough for me. Sitting in my bedroom, playing my guitar, singing songs, was enough for me. I didn't yet have the concept of, this is what a mature Christian life looks like. And you can almost have those standards, that those standards become the thing you're chasing, become your pursuit, and not God himself actually being your pursuit. But I felt like, because I didn't have those standards, I was okay with just sitting, being with God, experiencing, encountering his presence, reading his word. And that was really enough.
Wow. I think that speaks to so many of us. I think I want to kind of dig into, firstly, you were, as you said, zealous for God. In this moment, you said you could preach to anyone at all. Nothing in your circumstances was like a limitation to you because you're so focused on God. What stopped you, or maybe you didn't stop, from running to the pulpit, from running to everyone look at me, I've met God and I'm now teaching? Did you teach straight away, or did you have people around you that are like, let's slow down, let's journey through this, how you need to do things? You know what I mean? Like, a lot of us do get saved and quickly, because of the fire you're feeling, you go 10 miles way ahead of you. But you mentioned how you felt like, now looking back, you were way unprepared for ministry, way unprepared to actually preach and understand what it truly means. Yeah, like, what was your journey to understanding the mistakes? I first want to begin with, did you run to preach, or did you have someone stop you, or did you stop yourself? Yeah.
I didn't run to preach. No. It first started with singing to God. That was like my time with God.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'd be on my guitar, and I'd just sing whatever comes to mind, and like songs would flow from that place. But also, I didn't know what else to do outside of that. There was no other, like, this is what increase looks like, and you know, when you spend time with God, this is what you do with it. It was just me, God, my room, my guitar, my notebook, just spending time in that place. And I was able to like join up with like amazing brothers, to be able to find other people who also had that heart, who had also had those encounters with God in their own different ways. I found that the more and more I would sing songs, the more God would help me understand worship. The more God would make me sensitive to his heart. And so you can probably imagine, like, wide-eyed, innocent, ready to experience God in this same measure that I've been experiencing him in my room out there, right? When I go to gatherings, or when I'm in church, and when I'm with people who say that they know him, surely this measure of presence should be what I encounter when I'm in these places. And I remember going to these different places, different youth meetings and gatherings, and I would find that there was a disconnect between what I experienced in my room versus what I would experience out there. What I would experience in my room was like a fresh, pure presence of God, unfiltered, undeniable, with no motivation to do anything with it. It was just enjoying God. And I would go out and I would see in these rooms and gatherings that people almost had a different motivation. There was almost a desire to gather and have fun and enjoy to a point where there was no change afterward. There was no actual desire to meet with God, although there was a desire to sing his songs, to be in the room with other believers. And I got really frustrated. I got angry because of this disconnect. And that moved me from singing when I would be in places, singing alongside brothers and ministering, to actually teaching. And at first it was describing what I understood about the presence of God, because I just felt that people needed to know that the worship that God desires to receive comes from the heart. And people need to know that in order to worship rightly. And so I didn't see that as like a concept of teaching or maturing people. I was just sharing what God had helped me understand at that present moment.
I would love to be in this room. I'd love to be in this room. Just where you're being built, just being taught early on by the Holy Spirit, and just you and this guitar. We don't see this guitar. What happened to the guitar?
Hey, listen, I wasn't very, very good.
Okay.
But I wanted to. The reason why I learned the guitar is because I wanted to have control of my private time with God. I wasn't satisfied with playing songs because at times I would feel like those songs wasn't what God wanted to hear from me in that moment. So I would learn the guitar, and that's how I learned keys as well, because I wanted to take charge, and I wanted God to get the worship from me that He wanted to get in that very moment. So yeah, it all depends. It all depends. We'll see if it comes back.
You wanted to have more control with the worship, but at what point did you decide, I don't need it, or at least I'm not going to be using this anymore? Or did you stop?
There you go.
Ooh,
that's the right
is
question. No, I play my guitar with God regularly.
So it's a secret based thing.
Yeah. I remember I was in a conference 2019, and I was ministering, and I came off, and this was I think the first Game Changer conference that I'd been to. Shout out to our live church and Pastor Toby. But I came off after ministering, and there was a man of God who was preaching, and he said, I see you in your room, and he said, I see you with that guitar, with that notebook. And I just remember just like, man, okay, God recognizes this, and yeah, I like to leave that time for me, for my time with God. Yeah.
That has absolutely done something to me. No, that's absolutely beautiful. Wow. I think it's the fact that you began this journey in this space where you're like, God, this is where I'm encountering you. This is our thing.
Yeah.
And I think we get to see a lot of you in the public. We get to see you leading worship. We get to see you teaching. But with you taking this burden, this understanding where you now understood, God, this is what you like. This is what really moves you. But now you didn't just go up there to now sing songs and lead people there, but you understood, I guess, that it is through understanding, it's through knowledge of who He is, that they'll begin to know how to worship Him. I feel like God is so intentional with the patterns He uses, so intentional. I think when I think of you, I think worship, I think teaching, but I think it's beautiful to see how He's journeyed with you with those same things. The fact that you began with worship, you began with learning by yourself, not by yourself, but by the power of the Holy Spirit, and then you began to teach out of burden, and now you're discipling young people, and with the burden to see them transformed by His presence, just like you were as well. I guess I want to get into your head a little bit in terms of, you had the understanding and you had the burden. I want you to speak about the gap between being able to teach people and then being able to disciple them to a point where now this understanding is engraved in them and now they can go ahead and do the same.
Well, I guess, like, in order to fully answer that, I would probably need to explain where my gaps were. So, like I said, passionate, zealous, love the Lord like crazy, like crazy, to the point where now I get so excited when God makes Himself known in a room. There are some times, and like our team will know this, but there are some times where we're about to begin a service or gathering's about to start, and I'm like, guys, God is here. And that's, it's like, God is here. Like He fills this room, and it's so exciting for me that God just decides to be with us. And I had this all bubbling up inside of me. But one of the things that I was lacking was how I connect that reality with people. Remember how I said you can be so in the clouds, so aware of the presence of God, that God has to teach you how to do life. He has to teach you how to engage with the life around you. Otherwise, you end up becoming so estranged from people, from family, that there are things, or there are people that are around you that you are to minister Christ to, but you are unable to do that because you don't know how to carry what you have been given by God and give it to people. And I feel like I was at that stage. I felt like I had the passion, but I didn't know how to be patient with people. And so my philosophy was, God's encountered me in this way and he's helped me understand this. Surely if you just encounter God, you're going to get this too.
Yeah.
And when that wouldn't happen, I would be quite confused, also frustrated. And I'd go, okay, maybe it's just not time, or maybe you're just not the right person. So let me take it to maybe to people who may understand. And I was trying to rush people into a revelation that I also received, but instead of being patient and waiting for people to receive that from God, I was trying to like get them to engineer it. And it didn't work. I had no concept of caring for people. I was so zealous, so in love with the presence of God, that I was like, what are life's problems? You know? What are worries? What are issues? The presence of God is the answer. And although that is still true, I had missed out on a key gap that Jesus did all the time with people he met, where he would minister to their soul.
Yeah.
And the soul can be mixed up with so many things and can hold so much. But in my mind, it was like, okay, you're experiencing this in the flesh, and this is the reality in the spirit. So just come into the reality of the spirit. And I realized I was doing that at the expense of not properly and adequately speaking to the soul of people. So it was always, things are going on at home. Well, look, God has called us to do something, so we just need to get it done. And God had to teach me through my own life. God had to teach me through people that people don't work that way. And you can't miss the middle. You've got to engage with people's souls. You've got to hear where they're at and provide compassion, love, and care, and listen. And I realize that can still be true, and people can still move into the reality that God has for them. Both can be held. And I felt I missed that key part. And so the person who taught me like this term, pastoral care, Reverend Nee, my father in the Lord, I remember he asked me, what's your plan when we first started the fellowship? And he said, what's your plan to care for people? He was my mentor at the time, and we would meet in like Costa. And I was like, if people pray, they'll be okay. People are reading the word, they'll be fine. But I realized that I had no idea what it meant to care for people. So I was zealous. I loved the presence of God. Passionate. I wanted people to know and meet God. But people don't actually teach you that to be a leader is to listen to people. To be a leader is to tend to where people are at. And he's the one who introduced pastoral care. and that whole term, and yeah, that has transformed my leadership in many ways. Yeah, that was my gap. That was really what I was missing.
What is pastoral care?
Pastoral care is taking the scriptures and the wisdom of Christ and applying it to life's problems, life situations. It's coming alongside someone and helping them see where Christ and also the love of God is within their situation, and giving them the strength through the scriptures, through prayer, giving them the strength through sound wisdom to come out of that situation, but in most times to manage the situation that they're in. So that can look like in a number of ways. Sitting down and going to a coffee shop with someone, could look like a phone call, a Zoom call, whatever it might be. But the main heart of it is to be present with people as they are going through difficulty.
So you're in this place, and I'm going to dig into the coffee shop conversations, and you're speaking to Reverend, and you're like, I'm starting this fellowship. At what age? How old were you?
Well, when it actually started, 18. When I wanted to start it alongside Pastor Patrick, 17.
Okay. But you've been encountering God by yourself. You've been teaching here and there, but now you're taking on, I guess you're speaking of taking on the responsibility of young people. And I guess that makes sense as to why Reverend was asking you, what's your plan in being able to steward that? Now that you are where you are now, and you could look back in retrospect and be like, I made a lot of mistakes. What could you say to those young people who didn't get the privilege of just like benefiting from the Pastor Paul as you are now?
Probably start by saying I'm sorry. Yeah. You don't realize when you are in a position of a leadership, the same way that people benefit from what God is doing in your life, it's the same way that people are hurt when you take control and you step in. And I've realized over time that anything good that I do, it's God. Yeah. Anything bad that I do, it's me. And I would honestly say to those people, I am sorry, but thank you for being able to stick with me in those moments. Because not every person, not everything ended badly. And there were people who maybe just differences and God's call would guide and lead in different ways. But everyone who God brought alongside me, he brought to show me an aspect of himself. And there were some times where that lesson right over my head. But then there are some times where that failure teaches you to become more like Christ. And when you see how mismanagement, a lack of stewardship, falls on people and how it impacts people, you can't help but repent, turn back to God and say, God, help me. And I am not one of those people that will just plow on like everything's okay. And after every loss, after every, this is a bit awkward, after every bit of difficult conversation, I always went back to God and said, God, help me. Yeah. And just as David would pray, search my heart, know my ways. If you find any wicked way in me, lead me to the path of everlasting. God, if I spoke harshly when that was a moment to be soft, if I ignored something that I should have pressed into, if I allowed things to happen that shouldn't have happened, God, search my heart, know my ways. Yeah. If you find any wicked way in me, any lack of patience in me, any pride in me, lead me to yourself. Yeah, that is the cost of this thing called leadership, is that you are guaranteed to fail, because we still at times sin, and we still fall short of God's glory. And when doing that with people alongside is such a tender thing. And I've learned more and more how my consecrations and decisions in private, not just in public, also impact people. When God is calling a man to leadership, he calls the man. Yeah. And so there are things that will come with that man that will be brought into his leadership if not dealt with. And at that time, I was coming from like hyper independency. So situations are going on here and things are happening here. God has shown me something, so I'm going to run with it. And I realized how there were times where I would run and I would be running fast. And then I'd look behind me and I'd see that the people weren't running as quickly. My just such toxic trait, toxic response really was to like, okay, let's just keep running. I think God has taught me over time the need for me to slow down so that I can actually go back and carry and pick up those people who might not be running as quickly. That's been something that God has been helping me understand more and more. And so maybe like when God calls a person, they're thinking, okay, I have to make sure that I'm like this. And no, God calls you as the person. And the things that are true about who you are, leadership will expose those things. And they'll all come up. And you learn to deal with those things in private with God, but also you learn to be accountable in the midst of people, and you learn how to heal on the go, mature on the go, learn on the go. I feel like people stop because they're wondering, when am I going to get to this place? Or when am I going to reach this level? Or when am I going to become this? But actually, I'm really grateful to God that he found a space where he could call me, also grace me, also have mercy on me, also lift me to a new standard and help me understand him more and more throughout the process.
You mentioned a word that really kind of pierced me a bit. I think grace. I guess for the young leaders who are perhaps also on this journey and they're making quite a lot of mistakes or errors, or they're not seeing themselves as they want to be, they know they are. How does one give themselves grace in those seasons?
Isaiah chapter 6 comes to mind. Isaiah has vision, and he sees God's throne, sees the angels worshipping. And in this vision, the angel purges Isaiah's lips, cleans Isaiah, because God is about to take Isaiah from chapter 6 onwards to speak more on behalf of him. But you have to realize that before Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah was still prophesying. There was something in him that God had to deal with. And my challenge is, have you made a decision to live and die for the sake of Jesus being known? Do you make that decision daily? And once you are sure about making that decision, God, he sees the brokenness. He sees the humility. He sees your desire to become more like him, and he pours out grace. The thing that will attract grace is living a life of brokenness. Just like we were doing with the team yesterday evening. Like, we've finished a whole conference. we've held rooms and gatherings where people have been like, what is going on? But what was our prayer last night? Lord have mercy. Because no matter where you get to, no matter what level you're at, there is always a need for God to pour out mercy and grace. So pardoning you through the cross, through the death and the resurrection of Christ, but also empowering you by the Spirit to then go on and live a set-apart life. And so the challenge is, if you're holding yourself back now, then you are telling yourself that there is a point in your life where you're going to get everything right. And we know that that's unrealistic and it won't happen. You are going to mess up. King David himself, he gets to a point, you are the person who is after God. Like, you've gone through your whole season with Saul. You've come out as being faithful, having a heart for God, having a desire for his presence. And then you see that David falls in love with Bathsheba and kills her husband and sends her husband off to the front of the battle so that he can die. And you see the lust found in his heart. And you recognize that along the way, there are moments where the Holy Spirit will help you realize that there are things, maybe not manifested in your actions, but there are things in your motivations that aren't pleasing to him. And you've got to learn how, when you see those things, to not be discouraged by them, but to bring them to the cross. Constantly bring those habits to the cross, bring those attitudes to the cross, bring those mindsets to the cross. And the more and more you do that, you'll realize how Jesus dealt with sin. And God will renew your mind to know and to trust the darkness that's found in me. If I bring those things to the cross, that he actually helps me to live away aside from those things that might be reoccurring within my life. Yeah.
One thing that keeps ringing is that God actually knows you. He actually knows your weaknesses, and he still called you this leader. But Nima House. Nima House. I walked into Nima House and I said, I am never leaving. I am never leaving. It's a great testament just to hear of this story, to hear that it wasn't always easy, it wasn't always great, but God was there. But God was there.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful because I think it speaks to it speaks to staying in a place, to remaining in a place. I guess making that decision, I'm going to do all it takes to see Jesus lifted up, and I'm going to remain. I'm going to just remain. And it's been beneficial to many. Now it's a presence, people. Gosh, Nima House will never be forgotten.
Yeah.
As I said, like, I walked in there. This is someone who's just been born again for a few months, less than a year. Walked into Nima House and suddenly I could pray for a very long time. Suddenly,
come on, Jesus.
Matter of fact, you didn't know this, but I think I had just received the gift of tongues not long before that. So for me to walk into that room and now I'm just praying for ages and I don't know what's carrying me. I am just going. There's a certain power that was in that room. And I want to speak on how, I guess, cultivating that to ensure that when people do come in, every weight is lifted. When people do come in, what they can become is limitless. What they can become is no longer in anyone's hands but God. How does one cultivate that room?
You're speaking right to my heart, like right now, where my heart is. Because we tried many things. We felt God's call to be Numa House. We felt the need for his presence to dwell and his presence, his manifest presence to be real and tangible and encounter people. So naturally, the first thing you do when you want God to move, you want God to do stuff, is to work really hard. So let's pray lots, let's read the Bible a lot, and let's just make sure we get the activities right. And so we'd set out on fasts and we'd do this stuff, but we realized that whenever we would do more, we were getting less results. And I was quite intrigued by that, because surely if I've fasted, if I've prayed, if I've read the scriptures, if I've dragged everyone along to do the same thing, God, you've got to do something. And I guess what God showed me was a difference between godly activities and a godly heart. The moment we focused on the heart more than we did the activities, we actually started to see that God was doing more with less. And this is one of the secrets. I pray that every single leader, person who leads anything that is trying to bring people back to God, understands. It is not about what you do. It's about the content of your heart when you do it. And I did not understand this. But the moment I focused more on where are the hearts of the people, like where is the heart of our team? Because in the middle of planning for gatherings and for stuff like that, I realized that our team at the time got really stressed out. And so our minds were busy. We were just like, okay, we need to make sure we start on time. We've got these resources ready. And our minds were everywhere, that we didn't actually have enough space for faith to go, okay, God, what do you want to do? and to sit and have the patience to actually hear an answer. Because we know what the hallmarks of maybe a successful gathering today might look like. God, we want people to be healed. We want people to be delivered. We want people to be set free. And that's like the common theme. But actually, there is an intent, a desire specifically for whatever gathering that God has called. And the moment we just went, our efforts actually don't matter. We now started to respond, and the activity was now because we love God, not because we were trying to get him to do stuff within an evening. When we actually went, our activity actually doesn't make the difference. His presence does. We took ourselves off of the throne. We took our great ideas off of the throne. We took every bit of our skills off of the throne. Everything that we could contribute, we made it nothing. We said, God, you've got to make this 100%. A gathering that people are truly transformed is when it's 100% God. Not 60% God with our efforts. It's 100% God. And those efforts have a space. The prayer has a space. Reading the word has a space. The fasting has a space. And that's, God, I want to know you.
Huh.
That's the space.
Yeah.
So we put all our activity and steered it towards knowing God. And we said, God, whatever you want to do with this gathering, with this night, with this evening, with this day, with these 3 days, you do. The moment we did that, we started to see that our hearts were in the right place. Now, people who were coming didn't have this, I want to get mine and go mentality, but they had a, God, I'm here to love you, and whatever you want to do, we're happy with. We're satisfied with whatever you want to do. The moment that unity was there, we have what we have now, where we can be in a space, we could have one keyboard, but our hearts are burning because all of the other stuff God can use, but it's not necessary for God to use. And so we can have limited resources, limited numbers, but experience his presence like never before. Simply because our hearts are now set. We've shifted the goalpost back to Christ, back to loving him, back to him being the decider. Not, God, this is what I put in, so this is what I must get out. When you approach things like that, it's selfish. And you limit what God can do because it's all about results and it's less about the knowledge of him.
I think it's a reminder to the church. It's a reminder of exactly what he's calling us to do. To leave everything behind, to leave everything aside.
Yeah.
Everything that we thought we knew. I know nothing but Christ crucified.
Yes.
I know nothing but Christ crucified.
Yeah. It's crazy because if we showed people what our Friday gatherings as a team looks like, people would be so confused because we have been learning and God's been helping us master the art of waiting on him with no other agenda. And it's beautiful because that's what the secret place with us individually with God looks like. And we just wait on him. And we don't need to fill it with other stuff. And the moment you want to fill the silence and you want to make it an experience, you lose him, and you lose that tangibility, just that level of his heart, of his presence resting. I really feel like God is simple. God dwells where he's wanted. And when we have other things in the way, it muddies things up. And you can do this with any team, any kind of people you're around. Just go to them and say, what's the success of this gathering? I encourage any leader to do it. Sit with your team and go, what is the success? How will we know this gathering has been effective? You will know where the heart of each team member is after that question. And I realized that when we did this as a team, and we will ask ourselves, what are we expecting? I remember ahead of the conference, Presence 24, and we sat and we're like, what are we expecting? Everyone was just like, Jesus to be glorified. And it was like, that was enough. No wonder we encountered his presence in such a way, because nothing else would have made it successful other than him, other than his presence. And so that's like a sure way of checking where the hearts of people are.
I guess we've kind of gone through it, but I want you to, in short form, give advice to ministries who feel like they've been plowing, giving it all they can, but their seats are empty. They desire to see people encounter God in a magnificent way. What do you say?
First thing, check your heart. Why do you want the seats to be full? Know the answer to that, because then you will know whether your heart is in the right place, or whether you are desiring something because you want a successful looking ministry. And you want to make sure that you don't get yourself involved in that. You want to keep your heart, the heart of your people, pure, focusing on Jesus, Christ alone, as their focus. I think also it's about, and something we've understood more recently, it's about acknowledging the way God wants you to do ministry. It's only now we've been having conversations about the sounds that God loves to hear through us as a Presence people. The songs he loves to hear us sing. And we have a vision that people can unite around because it's clear and it ministers to God. And so you want to ensure that whatever your vision is, it's not a carbon copy of the next. Otherwise, you run the risk, really. You run the risk of their people already being taken, and you are trying to replicate that same thing. It's not going to work. So you want to make sure that it's a vision that ministers to Christ and that Christ is pleased with. From there, you will start to find, once you've got those two things clear, right heart, and it ministers to Christ, you will find people who are like-minded who will come. They'll just come because the vision has been made clear, and because it ministers to him, God places favor around it. So people just find you and people fall in love with what's being done. Yeah, that's my advice.
You've spoken before on like your Instagram, about contamination of the heart.
Mm.
And the Bible tells us that how can two walk together lest they agree? How does a leader ensure that this posture of their heart, how does a leader ensure that where my heart is where my entire, everyone in the house, everyone in this ministry is? Yeah.
God create a love for the scriptures and examining your heart through the scriptures. That's one very sure way of knowing whether what's in your heart is of God, whether it's the right motivation. Because as you study it together, you will begin to reflect on where is everyone at. Like, are we driving after the same thing? Do we all understand what God is calling us to do through the scriptures? And so creating consistent time for the scriptures. Like, we've done studies together as a team, and we've discussed passages where now we, like, if I mention Hebrews 12, everyone in the team's going to know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because we've studied it. And then I also think you've got to know each other. This is where proximity comes into play. You will have an inkling. I won't say you will know fully, but you might have an inkling or have the potential to know because you are close enough. I understand now why Jesus spent so much time with his disciples, because it's in proximity that things are revealed. It's in proximity that people can be honest. It's in proximity that people can be open and have those difficult discussions. So it's important that as a ministry, do you spend time together? Or is it just when you're planning for the next thing? Do you know each other? Have you been to each other's houses? You know, like, can their parents call you? can you call XYZ? You know, it's important that you don't just expect that you're all going to be on the same page. No, you do life together. Another thing I've learnt so much from my father in the Lord, and also our church, Pinim City, it's like proximity, being together, being found together, and things naturally come out of that place.
We've spoken a lot about leadership, but what is the position, what is the response of a follower? How can we as followers help our leaders and our ministries to actually flourish?
I think first thing comes in understanding. How much do you understand? I realize sometimes people aren't falling in line, not because they are trying to, get in the way, but because they just don't get it. How curious are you? How many questions do you ask, or how much you get what's going on and the heart behind it? When we transitioned from Numa House to Presence People, it was so important that everyone understood where we were going. Why we're now all of a sudden doing campaigns and going to different universities to disciple students, like why we're doing that stuff. And when people don't get it, it's difficult to follow. So instead of like twisting your own arm to just try your best to be submissive, actually like ask questions, find out, where are we headed? What's the heart behind this, so that you can be like a sponge and understand. And then the second thing I'd say is be willing. I know I just spoke about understanding, but sometimes you won't understand everything. It's being willing. Willing to go, okay, do I trust these leaders? Do I trust where God is leading this? Okay, if I do, and I'm sure God has sent me here, okay, I'm willing to give my time, give my energy, because in that you are serving your own vision. When you are called by God to a vision. By serving that, you serve your own call. People sometimes are waiting for God to single them out, to say, okay, you are called to do this by yourself. But no, your call can be to be a part of something. Your call isn't always to lead something or to be an individual who pioneers something. You can be called to follow. And so you have to recognize that as something you also are called to. You have to be willing to go above and beyond to serve it. It's not serving a person, it's serving Christ, because it's Christ who called you to that thing.